morning. That's an interactive moment. Let's do that again. Good morning. Thank you. Okay, right, I'm going to start with something I found out last year. The tin can was invented in 1772, but the tin can opener was not invented until 1855. Now, I think that says something interesting about human beings and how they approach problems, and I'll return to this a little later. I'm a reluctant futurist. There's no qualifications of being a futurist. I worked out that how to get called a futurist is to write a book with the word future somewhere on the title page. So that's how I became a futurist. One of the reasons I don't like being called a futurist is because it's associated with prediction, and human beings are very bad at making predictions for two reasons. We all tend to predict from our own set of prejudices, and also just the second, third, or the fourth order effects of things are far too complex for us to predict. And I just want to share with you some of my favourite examples of bad predictions from people who should have known better from the past. Man will not fly for 50 years, Wilbur Wright. He was building an aeroplane at the time. The horse is here to stay. This is quite famous. The automobile's just a fad. This is to Henry Ford's lawyer. I talked about prejudices, not just technological prejudices, but also cultural ones. So here from 1850 is a prediction about why the railways would never really take off, because women's bodies are not designed to go at 50 miles an hour. Do you know why? Because their uteruses will fly out of their bodies when accelerated to that speed. There is, however, a rumour this is why Southern won't go above 50 miles an hour. Standing womb only. So anyway, here's another one. Who the hell wants your actors talk? This is from Harry Warner, one of the Warner brothers. You'd think he'd know, wouldn't you? You'd think he'd have an interest in that, you know? But maybe he'd foreseen this and was just trying to head us off at the pass. I don't know. More seriously, what about this? There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. This is from the president of the Digital Equipment Corporation in 1977. Couldn't understand anyone with a computer in their home. Now, I'm going to show you another set of predictions that were stratifiably wrong more recently. If you go to the people that we all spend lots of money with, the Gartners, the Forresters, and the McKinseys, to help us think about the future and plan our strategy, look what they said about mobile phones in 2002. 60% growth per year. They were wrong about that. Didn't learn their lesson, though, because they didn't really understand networks. So they said, oh dear. And they just kept getting it wrong. Why is this? Why can't people make these predictions about technology? Well, one reason might be elucidated by the great Douglas Adams. He said there are three types of technology. There's a technology invented before you're born, which you don't think of as technology. It's just there. Carpet tiles are a technology. But none of you walked in and went, wow, carpet tiles! They've got carpet tiles as idea, mate, because carpet tiles were there when you were born. And if you've got kids who were born after 1989, you'll know that they don't think of the World Wide Web as an exciting and wonderful thing, do they? They just expect it to work. So we're ambivalent about those technologies. Then there's technology invented between you being born, your middle age. This is terribly exciting. It's probably going to change the world. Your grandparents don't understand it, and you can almost certainly get a job out of it, which is fantastic. And for my generation, that's things like the internet and mobile phones. And you can tell them over 40 because they say mobile phones. So we're very excited about that. And then there's technology invented after your middle age, which is completely pointless and makes you angry. And for my generation, that's things like Twitter. I've got friends who are literally furious, incandescent with rage about Twitter. What's it for? Now, whilst I found that funny when I read it, I also found it unwittingly profound, because when the work I do, whether that's with a government or corporation or investment house, you will find that the people who decide the strategic direction of that organisation are usually in the last category. And most of the people they're trying to work with, whether that's their citizens, their employees, their students, are in the second. And that leads to institutional bewilderment, where organisations, particularly large and old ones, find it harder and harder to deal with ever faster change. Not just technologies, but new ways of thinking, new ideas. And this is problematic because technology is speeding up. In fact, it always has been. This is a distribution graph got from the National Intelligence Council in America. It shows you how long it takes 25% of the United States population to adopt a new technology from its introduction to the market. As you can see, 46 years for electricity, just 7 for the World Wide Web, because each technology provides the tools and the platform to build the next one. There's a famous phrase in futurology from William Gibson, the author: the future is coming faster than you think. Guess what? Always has been, always will be. The other thing I love about this graph, they even got it from the National Intelligence Council. They managed to spell television wrong. Anyway, let's just look at let's just look at a couple of technologies. Mike, who said in the conference, asked me to talk about driverless cars in the introduction in particular. So I just want to talk about two technologies that are going to interact and change everything as an example of how change can really evolve. So we're going to talk about electric cars and driverless cars and what happens when you put them together. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't really understand about electric cars is this. This is the drivetrain of an electric car. This is a Tesla. And as you can see, it has far fewer moving parts than a normal car. And what that means is that car will last 1 million miles, not 200,000. So suddenly, the cost per mile plummets. And you combine that with driverless technology, it becomes pointless to own a car. It becomes an expensive, stupid thing to do. So when these technologies combine, and I'm going to show you an analysis now from what's going to happen in America, interesting things happen. So you're not owning a car now, you're buying transport as a service, which if you're an American family will put $5,600 a year into your pocket. That's a $1 trillion per year spending boom, which is good or bad depending on what those Americans spend it on. Because these cars are now lasting longer, of course, it reduces the need for us to manufacture cars by 70%. The manufacturers, of course, are now taking responsibility for the crashes. They're taking liability, so the car insurance market disappears. The driver insurance market disappears. And because we're moving increasingly over to renewables, the demand for oil goes down by $30 million a day in America. And that's just one of two technologies happening right now, and that's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years. So Ollie mentioned artificial intelligence. We're all worried about artificial intelligence at the moment, and this is just a headline from last week. Now, is this going to happen? Well, yes, probably. Oxford Martin School did this rather brilliant report a couple of years ago where they list literally thousands of jobs that are likely to be automated, not just low-skilled jobs, but sort of middle-class jobs as well. Now, what are we going to do about this? Well, we have two options. One, we ignore this, which is what a lot of our policymakers are doing at the moment, and we have mass unemployment and civil unrest. And Ed and others are going to talk about education later, saying, with the education system, we really need to think about a world where the machines are doing a lot of the jobs we're currently training our kids to do. So either we ignore it all and we have this, or option two is we build an economy of the jobs the machines can't do and never will be able to do, jobs of asking the right question, empathy, compassion, systems thinking. And the wonderful David Price will talk a lot about this in his talk later. So I'm going to do the rest of my talk based around what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the bad news is, you may have noticed that everything is broken. Have you not noticed that? It doesn't take more than a pint on a Friday night for most of us. Have you noticed that everything's largely fucked? It's just going horribly wrong. Democracy is broken. This is democracy in our country in 1850. This is what it looks like in 2018. You're laughing at that because the ridiculousness of it is true. In the same time, computing has done this. And this is one of the reasons, because we're trying to use an 18th century system, 19th century to handle 21st century challenges. It's one of the reasons we have a total collapse in the trust of institutions that govern society. This isn't along political lines. It belongs, basically, the people who do well out of it, probably some of the people in this room, think we're okay, and we should trust our institutions, and most other people don't. In fact, 90% of them don't trust the institutions that govern society anymore, for good reasons. Because particularly democracy, as it's practiced today, is not very good at democratizing things, is it? It's not good at democratizing health, wealth, education, opportunity. So you can't really call it democracy anymore. Our media is, of course, broken. Now we're supposed to have a free press in this country. Of course, it's actually owned by 9 billionaires. Is it really a free press? Does it really help? Well, on one side, we have the kind of the racist, homophobic, phone-hacking protectors of an establishment status quo. On the other side, we have the echo chamber of establishment lefty nerds and catastrophists, and somewhere in the middle of the accountants. This is not working, though. That laughter tells me you also believe this to be true, that this is not. These people are supposed to hold that feigned democracy to account, aren't doing it, which is why trusted media plunges to all-time lows. The environment, which Gabriel will talk a lot about later, I hope, is, as Johan Rockström says around the Stockholm Resilience Centre, the environment is starting to send back invoices, whether that's hurricanes season or flooding in Bangladesh or wildfires in Australia and California. And what is the cost of the invoice? Well, a brilliant banker and economist, a man called Pavan Sukhdev, tried to work out what that bill is. We're going to have to fix the environment. We're going to have to fix that damage we've done. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. And he tried to put a figure on it, and the figure he came up was $7.3 trillion a year that we're not accounting for. If you're invested in fossil fuels, stop for two reasons. One, because you're a human being and you have children, and second, because it makes really dumb financial sense. Here is the big circle is the amount of carbon which are proven reserves, okay, of the oil companies. And the small circle is what we can burn and keep ourselves below 1.5 degrees. Those are currently valued at $22 trillion, those oil reserves at the moment, gas reserves. And the actual value is, of course, zero, because we can't burn them. As Mark Carney says, most fossil fuels cannot be burned. The economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. Gaylord Nelson, the American senator, said this, and he's entirely right. So a lot of you are investors, and what this translates to is any investment that doesn't consider the environment isn't an investment. In any meaningful sense, it's a cost on the future, also known as stealing from your children and everybody else's. I'm serious. Wealth is broken, of course. Interesting saying this back to this room, but as you know, 1% of the world's wealth, 1% of the world's population own 50% of the wealth. And this is unsustainable, because it leads to a world of work that's entirely broken. Gallup do this survey every couple of years, and they go around to all the loads of employers all over the world and ask people how engaged they are with their work, and pretty much conclude that 85% of people aren't, because they realize they're working for a smaller and smaller slice of the pie and supporting a system that's destroying their chances for the future and the environment. It's nicely summed up, I think, by this great cartoon by Tom Toro. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. The fact that you're laughing at that tells me you think that's true. And if you think that's true, that means you have a responsibility to do something about it. I quite like this cartoon as well. Dad, I'm considering a career in organised crime, government, or private sectors. And of course, in most countries, the education system still thinks the world looks like this. So it's all broken. Nicely summed up, I think, by William Burroughs, who said in the 1960s, after one look at this planet, any visitor from space would say, I want to see the manager. By the way, as some of the wealthiest people in this country, you are the manager. Because what you decide tells the rest of the world what to do. So what are you going to say to that alien? And what are you going to do about it in the next 20 years? Now, what tends to happen is that organizations, governments, corporations, whatever, come to people like me and say, okay, we understand this, we understand we have technological disruption, we understand this environmental problem, we understand these problems with society, we've got a solution, Mark, and it's innovation. We're going to innovate. Yes, you've been there. Right, now, this is bullshit. This is usually bullshit. What this usually means is what we're going to do is we're going to get KPMG to come in and rewrite the human resources manual with the word creativity in it. We're going to have a nice new logo that looks a bit greener. We'll do some corporate social responsibility that'll act as a fig leaf for the fact that other operations are in fact destroying the planet. And we'll have an innovation space on the third floor with some primary colours and some beanbags and nothing too sharp. Okay? This is not innovation. That is innovation wash. It's the appearance of innovating without changing anything. Why does this never work? Because of the 5 most important words ever said about organizational psychology, Peter Drucker's culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't change the culture of your organization to think differently, you will never be able to solve these problems. Here's a really great example from history. Blockbuster were approached by Netflix and said, will you buy us? And Blockbuster went, no. People always want to take a cassette home. Why? Because the biggest revenue source for Blockbuster was late return fees. They had to have you take a cassette home so they could charge you late for bringing it back. Nicely summed up by Upton Sinclair's great quote, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding. Keep that in mind as you listen through today, because there's lots of things you're going to not like, because your wealth may depend on it not being true, but it won't stop it being true. So what is innovation really? Well, I believe that innovation is the culture of asking the right questions. And yet we have organizations continually giving us answers to questions that nobody ever asked. Like this is my absolute favorite. This is the Kerastase hair coach. It's a Wi-Fi enabled hairbrush that has a humidity sensor and a microphone that analyzes your brushing style and will give you a hair manageability score via a smartphone app. Exactly. Millions of pounds and careers went into creating this. Shareholder value was supposed to be created by this ridiculous idea. Here's another entirely useless product. What's it for? What does it do? We have climate change, we have the retreat of democracy. What does it do? The biggest innovation in the iPhone X is you can now have an animated emoji to express your inner panda. It's pointless. Apple are no longer asking any of the right questions, like many big organizations. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is we can fix it. And a lot of what we'll hear about today is how we're going to fix it. Look, this is what's happened to solar panels. Okay, so the lines on the right are the predictions from your Gartners and your McKinseys about what they think is going to happen. Of course, they're getting it wrong again. We are installing 500,000 solar panels every single day in the world right now. Even the FT says this is just basically unstoppable. Fossil fuels are over. And the wonderful Jeremy Leggett later, who's been part of this battle to move to renewables, will be talking about that. So pay attention to him. We'll also be making fuel out of the sky, the Solar Fuels Institute. And I work with the Virgin Earth Challenge, where we have 11 finalists who are taking carbon dioxide out of the sky, and some of them are turning it into fuel, which means we'll have a distributed liquid fuel source that's carbon neutral. That's arriving sometime in the next 10 to 15 years. The blockchain arrives, which perhaps might remove a lot of the friction in our financial systems and our transactional systems, and David Birch will talk about that later. Another innovation you've heard a lot about, of course, is 3D printing. These are 3D printed car parts and aircraft parts. I've been working with this company. They'll 3D print you a house in 3 hours and assemble it in 2 days. It costs you half the price of a normal construction. Just network these people with Médecins Sans Frontières because they believe they can print a hospital in 1 day, fly it out the next, and assemble it the day after. 3D printed complex molecules from scratch. Now the most important company in the world you've never heard of, Nanoscribe. And they print on the nanoscale. That's smaller than 80,000 times smaller than a human hair. It's the size of microchip components. First thing they printed was this tiny replica spaceship from a not very successful science fiction movie called Wing Commander. That tells you an awful lot about the people who work at Nanoscribe. Then they start manufacturing things like this. This is a scaffold for holding individual cells. And right now, they'll sell you a printer that will print components for microchips. These are small components. Simple components at the moment. This is expensive at the moment, but we know where this is going. And what this points to is a world, probably in your lifetime and certainly your children's, where 3D printers will be able to print all the components required to assemble 3D printers. Now, you add that on to a frictionless transactional network via blockchain, which David will talk about. That's somebody saying, get out now! Quick sell! You add that onto a distributed renewables energy revolution, where energy gets a lot cheaper, and all sorts of things start to change. All bets are off. You've got to imagine a world, for instance, where your mobile phone never runs out of power because a solar panel on it is so good, where that mobile phone can give you a blood test, and based on that blood test, you'll be able to download the design of a drug and get it printed at your local pharmacy. And that's not even science fiction. I've been doing some strategic work with the mobile phone industry. We're excited about this. This screen has a solar panel. 3 minutes under a light, 1 minute talk time. 5 years from now, it will never run out of battery. If you suffer from diabetes, you'll know about blood tests that are attached to your mobile phone. These are now all combining into these devices on the right, which are combining lots of different tests and can diagnose you better than your doctor. And the first 3D printed drug was approved by the FDA 2 years ago. Now, this is currently printed in their factories at the moment, but you know where this is going. So when people come to me and say, we're a little bit worried about digital disruption, Mark, can you help us with digital disruption? I go, digital disruption, it was the cocktail sausage before dinner. Okay? It was the hors d'oeuvre. Have you not known it's already happened? You've got to be ready for the next wave of disruption, which is the same level of democratization and distribution is coming to the physical world and the energy world and the financial world. And that's going to change the definition of wealth. So what is wealth really? Well, I get to work with, people like you, the odd billionaire here and there. And if you do that, you always have to work with the wealth manager, who's always called Rupert. I never know why that is, but they're always called Rupert. Even the women, all called Rupert. Anyway, if you say, Rupert, what's your definition of wealth? Rupert gets it wrong. He says wealth is stuff. Wealth is assets. This is not wrong. This is wrong. What wealth is power. You have enough money to make other people do things that you want. And you coerce them via this thing called an employment contract. I like to say that nobody would work for the company they work for if they had as much money as the company they work for. Now imagine a world where the average citizen has access to cheap energy, a 3D printer that prints a 3D printer, a trusted and transparent transactional network for doing financial transactions via blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. Your ability to coerce that person because of the number in your bank account has been radically eroded. Your power has been eroded. Not completely, but in the same way the gap between information rich and information poor was eradicated by the internet, so this will happen with wealth. And so what do smart, wealthy people do? They realize if they still want their power, if they still want to make things happen that they want to happen, they better start showing moral leadership, saying important things about climate change, gender inequality, social justice. And if they don't do that, they will lose their relevance. My friend Juan Enriquez, probably the greatest investor in America, says there will be whole nations who end up on the scrap heap because they don't understand this stuff. John Seeley Brown, nearly every social, technical, and business infrastructure we have can't survive, which is good, because we're in a mess. But I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Bad is everything's broken. The good is we can fix it. The ugly is it is going to get messy. The next 20 years are going to be a bloodbath. And our job is to try and shorten that mess and try and make it affect as few people as possible. We're moving from economies of scale to economies of distribution. And most organizations won't get it. Look, this is the average lifespan of an American company in the last 50 years. You foresee now this hides some mergers and acquisition activity, so that the trend isn't as extreme as this, but the trend is undeniable. Large organizations, as I said earlier, are finding it harder and harder to deal with ever faster change. Are you ready? Because nothing I've shown you, and nothing you're going to hear about today, is science fiction. It is reality. It is going to happen. And as Philip K. Dick rather brilliantly said, reality is that when you stop believing it doesn't go away. It's not going away, and you have to deal with it. So I'll finish by saying a few things. That taking the future seriously is going to cost some people their jobs and their wealth, and I'm sorry about that. But not taking it seriously is going to cost everyone their jobs. So start thinking about how you run your business, and run it perhaps using Kate's network of the donut. She says in the middle of the donut, we have to raise everybody above a certain level. We have to give people energy, voice, jobs, social equity. But we can't bust past those things on the outside of the donut, which is the planetary boundaries. This is the safe operating environment for humanity. And right now, if we look at the world, it looks like this. We're failing miserably. Now, luckily, the UN has given you 17 things you need to think about if you want to run your business well. And if you're not doing something about these, why? Because actually, you'll make more money doing that as well. Investing companies understand what's actually happening and doing something about it. And as the National Bureau of Economic Research will tell you, those companies actually outperform the market in the long run anyway, because they think systemically. Even now we're getting investment funds that are using the Sustainable Development Goals as their investment criteria. This is the beginning of a big change. Even BlackRock are saying it. Companies that maximize good citizenship over short-term profits will be the ones that prosper. And not all superheroes wear capes. A lot of them wear quite boring business suits. You can be heroes. But if you don't take this responsibility seriously, they will come after you with pitchforks quite soon. Now, the good news is, if you want to subvert the status quo, you need to have more fun than they are. Make sure they know you're having more fun while you're doing it. This is my friend Ed Gillespie. Getting on the right side of history is where all the action is, where all the fun is. A great wind is blowing, said Catherine the Great, another time in history when everything was changing. That either gives you imagination or a headache. My brief this morning was to give you a bit of both. But perhaps this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt sums it all up. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of your dreams. As you go through today, dream and dream hard. This is the world you inherited. This is you. Thank you very much.